It is dawn on June 22, 1941. Across a front stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, the earth shakes beneath the thunder of a mechanized onslaught the world has never seen before. Germany has just unleashed Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in human history. 3 million soldiers, thousands of aircraft, and more than 3,000 tanks surge into Soviet territory. In front of them lies a Red Army that appears, on paper, disorganized, outdated, and unprepared. Berlin expects total collapse in weeks, but deep inside Soviet factories, far from the front lines, an ugly, unpolished machine waits to prove the German high command catastrophically wrong. It is not refined, it is not elegant, it is not even fully understood by many of the soldiers who drive it. Yet this one machine, the T-34, would become the backbone of the Soviet counteroffensive, a tank whose simple but radical design choices would alter the trajectory of the war. And the secret was not any single breakthrough. It was a combination of 3 nearly overlooked engineering decisions: a Christie suspension that let the tank move like no other in 1941, brilliantly sloped armor that transformed every plate into a shield twice as strong as it looked, and a brutal, rugged diesel engine that refused to die, even in the frozen ruins of Russia's burning cities. This is the story of how those unassuming choices saved the Soviet Union from destruction. Before the storm, a tank that almost didn't exist. The T-34's story does not begin in 1941. It begins almost a decade earlier, in a Soviet Union haunted by the trauma of past wars and terrified of future ones. The Red Army had watched the world modernize its armored forces. After World War I, France developed heavy but slow-witted tanks. Britain created sophisticated but unreliable ones. Germany, restricted by treaty, focused on theories and doctrine, preparing for a future war they were not yet allowed to fight. And the Soviets? They faced an agonizing question. What kind of tank could survive a war across the endless plains of Eastern Europe? At the Kharkov locomotive factory, engineer Mikhail Koshkin believed he had an answer. His early prototypes, first the BT series, and later the A-20 and A-32, featured an American invention that seemed strange to Soviet planners: the Christie suspension, developed by U.S. innovator J. Walter Christie. Western armies dismissed it. It looked awkward, too experimental, too unconventional. But Koshkin saw what others missed. Christie's system used large road wheels, long travel coil springs, and a unique layout that allowed unprecedented cross-country speed. In a theater dominated by mud, snow, and primitive roads, speed was not a luxury. It was survival. Still, many within the Red Army doubted Koshkin. A fast tank was impressive, they argued, but survival was determined by armor and firepower. Engineers responded with another unorthodox idea: armor that sloped at steep angles, redistributing impacts and nearly doubling effective thickness. Combined with a powerful 76.2 millimeter gun and a robust V2 diesel engine, the result was a tank unlike any the world had seen. And yet, as fate would have it, the T-34 almost died before being born. The tank commissions and the decisions that changed everything. In early design meetings, Soviet leadership pushed back fiercely. Marshal Grigory Kulik, a powerful figure with deep influence, despised new technology he didn't fully understand. He dismissed sloped armor as fantasy mathematics, arguing that armor should be thick, not angled. He had the political power to kill the T-34 program entirely. Koshkin, aware that a single committee meeting could erase years of work, decided on a desperate gamble. he ordered 2 prototypes to embark on a long-distance proving march from Kharkov to Moscow, over snow, mud, and half-frozen roads, to demonstrate that his design was not theory, but reality. The prototypes made it, though Koshkin became fatally ill from the journey. But the demonstration worked. Soviet leadership, including Stalin, approved mass production. Factories were ordered to begin immediate manufacture, even though many workers had never seen the blueprints before. The T-34 entered service in early 1940 and 1941, just in time, though barely, for when Germany invaded in June, most T-34 crews had received almost no training. Many hadn't fired the gun once. The tank's potential was enormous, but unrealized. Still, what happened in the first weeks of Barbarossa stunned the German army. Barbarossa, the shock of encounter. As German panzer divisions surged deep into Soviet territory in the summer of 1941, they expected to face swarms of T-26 and BT-7s, thinly armored, lightly armed tanks that German guns could demolish at almost any range. And for the most part, they did. But then, German commanders began receiving strange reports. Our shells are bouncing off. We cannot penetrate from the front. This new tank is faster than anything we have. It climbs slopes our vehicles cannot. It appears invulnerable. These messages, preserved in wartime diaries and after-action reports, referred to the first encounters with the T-34. At first, German officers thought it was some rare, heavy tank, perhaps a limited prototype. What they didn't know, what truly terrified them, was that the T-34 was designed for mass production. Not exclusivity factories in Kharkov, Stalingrad, and the Urals were preparing to produce thousands. But in the summer of 1941, the T-34's impact was not measured in numbers. It was measured in shock. At Dubno-Lutsk-Brody, one of the largest armored clashes of the early war, small groups of T-34s engaged Panzer III and IV units with startling results. German 37mm anti-tank guns, nicknamed door knockers by German crews, could barely scratch the T-34's angled hull. Even at dangerously close ranges, many shots simply ricocheted. German accounts describe moments of disbelief. The Russian tank turned its sloped front toward us. We fired and scored hits, but nothing happened. Panzer Regiment 11 After Action Report. The key to this resilience was not thick armor. It was angled armor. A T-34's 45mm frontal plate, sloped at 60 degrees, effectively acted like 75mm of flat armor. Combined with the tank's mobility, courtesy of the Christie suspension, T-34s could strike, disengage, and reposition before German crews fully understood what was happening. Still, for all its strengths, the T-34 had serious flaws. Crews were undertrained. Optics were inferior. Communications were nearly non-existent, with many tanks lacking radios. But these weaknesses hid the core truth. The Germans had made a fatal miscalculation. They expected the Soviet Union to collapse before modern tanks could matter. They were wrong. The Christie suspension, the secret weapon no one took seriously. To understand why the T-34 was so effective in 1941, we must look closely at a component often ignored in popular accounts: the suspension. The Christie system wasn't glamorous. It didn't inspire fear in the same way as guns or armor, but it enabled the T-34 to do something German tanks simply couldn't: maintain high speed and stability across uneven terrain. German vehicles like the Panzer III and IV used leaf spring suspension, which performed well on roads but poorly on soft ground. The moment they left hard surfaces, their mobility dropped dramatically. The T-34 did not have this problem. Its wide tracks, supported by large road wheels on the Christie system, distributed weight over a larger area. This gave the T-34 astonishing off-road mobility. It crossed mud where German tanks bogged down. It charged across snowfields that stopped panzer divisions cold. It climbed slopes with a grace that stunned German engineers. It could perform high-speed maneuvers in fields, forests, and ravines. This mobility advantage mattered enormously on the Eastern Front, a battlefield where paved roads were rare and terrain punished the unprepared. German General Heinz Guderian later wrote in frustration that the T-34 had greater mobility than any of our tanks, a statement backed by numerous German technical evaluations. Mobility, not armor, was the T-34's first true superpower, but its armor would become legendary. Sloped armor, a revolution hiding in plain sight. Most tanks of the 1930s and early 1940s featured vertical armor plates. Engineers knew that sloping armor increased effectiveness, but manufacturing complexity and doctrinal conservatism kept the idea on the margins. The T-34 broke that tradition. Its low silhouette and sharply angled hull transformed its protection without adding excessive thickness or weight. The angles caused incoming rounds to deflect, dissipate energy, or fail to penetrate altogether. This was especially devastating against early war German anti-tank guns. 37mm pack, 36 rounds often bounced harmlessly. 50mm guns could penetrate, but only at optimal angles and close range. Even the short-barreled Panzer IV 75mm struggled unless firing from the sides. The psychological effect on German crews was immediate. Soldiers, accustomed to cutting through enemy tanks with ease, suddenly faced machines that shrugged off hit after hit. As one German tanker recalled, "We fired at this sloped tank and watched every shell glance away. For the first time, we understood we were not fighting a backward enemy." But armor and mobility alone did not make the T-34 unstoppable. Something else kept these machines alive through hellish temperatures, burning forests, and the frozen carcass of the Soviet countryside. Something loud, smoky, and indestructible. The rugged diesel heart of the Eastern Front. The T-34's V2 diesel engine was a masterpiece of wartime engineering. Lightweight, fuel-efficient, robust, and powerful. While many German tanks still relied on gasoline engines, more flammable, more temperamental, and less suited for extreme cold, the Soviet diesel power plant thrived in the harshest environments. During the Russian winter, panzer units fought bitter mechanical battles just to start their engines. Fuel congealed, lubricants froze, and entire battalions were immobilized by temperatures that dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius and below. The T-34. Many could start with nothing more than a warming brazier placed underneath. Soviet mechanics later recalled, "In the cold, German engines screamed. Ours coughed once and lived." Diesel also reduced the likelihood of catastrophic fires when the tank was hit, a vital advantage when every second could mean the difference between survival and death. Combined with a drivetrain designed for primitive conditions, the T-34 could operate where German vehicles simply could not. In 1941, that mobility often meant escaping encirclement, launching surprise counterattacks, or reaching defensive positions before the Germans could exploit breakthroughs. The T-34 engine was the reliable heartbeat of the Soviet counteroffensive that would come later. But first, the Red Army had to survive the onslaught. 1941, the hardest year in Soviet history. Despite the T-34's strengths, the summer and autumn of 1941 were catastrophic for the Soviet Union. Millions of soldiers were captured. Cities fell in days. Factories were evacuated piece by piece, loaded onto trains bound for the Urals. Entire divisions vanished under the weight of the blitzkrieg. And yet, amid this chaos, the T-34 remained one of the few bright spots. Crews quickly learned that their tank could execute maneuvers German panzers struggled to match. They used forests, marshes, and even burning villages as cover, striking with surprise and retreating before the Germans could adapt. But these were tactical successes overshadowed by strategic disaster. Germany still advanced, seemingly unstoppable toward Leningrad, Kiev, and Moscow. And then came the moment both sides feared: winter. 1941, where the T-34 becomes a legend. As temperatures plunged, the German offensive stalled. Engines froze, gearboxes cracked, tracks became brittle. Soldiers shivered in summer uniforms. But the T-34 adapted effortlessly. Its wide tracks prevented it from sinking into snowdrifts. Its diesel engine started in conditions that crippled German armor. Its mobility allowed Soviet units to launch winter offensives when the enemy was weakest. The German diaries from the Moscow counteroffensive paint a picture of unfolding disbelief. The Russians attack with tanks that move through snow as if it were nothing. Our vehicles cannot follow. Wehrmacht soldier, 3rd Panzer Group. The Germans had expected a short war. They had planned for victory before winter. They had never imagined that the Soviets possessed a tank tailored perfectly for the climate. The T-34's simple robustness, its rough welds, its stamped parts, its utilitarian engine, became advantages, not flaws. And for the first time, the Germans began to comprehend a chilling truth. This tank was not a prototype. It was the future. Cliffhanger. A new kind of war emerges. By early 1942, German strategists reached a terrifying conclusion. The T-34 was not merely effective, it was superior to every tank Germany fielded at the time. And worse, Soviet factories, now relocated east of the Ural Mountains, were preparing to produce thousands more. The war on the Eastern Front was changing. The Germans no longer faced a crumbling, disorganized enemy. They faced an industrial giant awakening from its slumber. And at the center of that awakening stood a tank that German planners had never expected to fight, let alone to fight by the tens of thousands. What happened next would determine the future of the war and the fate of the world.